to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, July 21st, 2015. Getting into the week here. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, before we get into the news, I need to do a little bit of a personal rant and get it off my chest here. As you know, my respect for the American IT establishment has been declining rapidly over the last couple of months. And is probably down there pretty much with the rest of the world, looking at the NSA compromised, over-bloated, too expensive, and full of bugs state of the art, as it were. And as I mentioned yesterday, I'm dealing with a situation with Time Warner Cable and its local branch, Oceanic. A couple of weeks ago, they sent me a brand new upgraded modem that will support, supposedly, in theory, 300 megabits per second. I didn't ask for this. And I didn't order it, but apparently they're upgrading their center. The old modems won't work. So here, free at no cost, we're upgrading your service. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Except that, while I'm using this modem at 300 megabits per second, which means I'm actually getting about 170 megabits per second, I keep getting connection loss on some of the programs that I use to do this radio show, like the connection to the Comrex stack, window into my server. And it's very, very frustrating. So I spent about 27 minutes on the phone, on hold, listening to endless commercials for what a great service Time Warner Oceanic is, before I finally got to talk to this very lovely lady over in the Caribbean, man. That's a quarter of the world away, completely different ocean, not anywhere near us here in Hawaii. And after getting referred up the line to supervisors, it's a problem. They know it's a problem. They're getting complaints about it, but they have no idea what's going on. The one thing I did find out that I need to share with all of you, if you're getting one of these new cable modems, it's got 4 ports on the back. You're only allowed to use one. It's not actually a router. It looks like a router, and they admit probably the documentation should make a point of saying it's not a router, and you can't plug multiple devices into it. Good thing to know. So I say, to be on the safe side, let's drop this modem's bandwidth down to 100 megabits per second, which is what I had before on the old modem, which I can't get back. Okay, if you're going to do that, we go through the reset, reconnect, make sure everything is still working. And then just before we went to air, when I start to fire up the BAM user and everything else, I notice it just seemed to be taking a long time. So I shut everything down and I go to Oceanic's own speed test, which is here locally on the island. Doesn't go to the mainland, so I don't have to deal with slowness of the connection going to the mainland. And apparently my modem has been set down to just 30 megabits per second, 1/10 of what I am paying for, 1/3 of what I had before this nonsense all started. So after the show, I'm going to have to sit on hold again and deal with all of that nonsense. And I'm beginning to see why so many people hate these large internet corporations. Once they get into the status of being a monopoly, and cable has been a monopoly since it was created. Everybody gets a single assigned provider. You're not allowed to choose. There's no competition. And the costs go up, quality goes down. I'd rather have slow and reliable than whiz-bang fast and dropping my connections. But cutting me from 300 to 30 megabits per second, I don't think is a viable solution. So pardon my rant, but I have just been dealing with all this accumulated dreck inside the current state of the art of the American IT industry, and I'm really kind of fed up with it. Does make me enjoy my VIC-20 all that much more. You plug it in, it runs, you type things in, it does work, which is the way it's supposed to be. Rather than you're spending hours and days and weeks and months of your life accomplishing absolutely nothing of any resaleable value while you try and figure out all the problems that were in the product when it came out of the box. All right, let's get on to some serious news here. The U.S. is threatening to expand the current sanctions against Russia, ostensibly to enforce the Minsk Accords. Now, of course, it's Kiev that's been violating the Minsk Accords. They're shelling Donetsk. They're sending troops all over the place. But Washington, D.C.'s official position is this is all Putin's fault, therefore we're going to slap more sanctions against Russia to teach him that he has got to comply with the Minsk Accord. Remember, Putin's the guy who came up with the Minsk Accords. And the U.S. is out there saying, Kiev, we're supporting them, we're against Russia, it's all Russia's fault. Now, Russia has just confirmed the deal with Greece to construct the new Turkish Stream natural gas pipeline. It's going to bring much-needed revenue and jobs into Greece, something that the ECB and the EU and the IMF couldn't do. But they are going ahead with this project, and Russia's going to be pouring money into Greece, whereas the European Union continues to pour debt. Let's see. I'm getting complaints in the chat room that, yes, in fact, they're not. Anyway, I hope you're all getting this show, but apparently today it's not a guarantee. Now, over in Turkey, there's a big scandal brewing because Turkey, like Israel, like the U.S., is trying to pretend that ISIS is the big bad enemy and we're all bombing Syria, not to harm Syria and Assad, but to get the big bad evil ISIS. Well, it turns out Erdogan's own daughter is in charge of a hospital treating injured ISIS fighters. It was supposed to be a big secret. Apparently the secret has been blown off, the lid is blown off on this. Erdogan's own daughter, who is a trained medical professional, so this is not just nepotism, but she's been put in charge of a, up until recently, covert hospital to treat the ISIS wounded. Erdogan's son is running a business smuggling goods into Syria for ISIS and goods stolen in Syria by ISIS back to Turkey. And there is no way the United States government doesn't know this is going on. Turkey is supporting ISIS. Turkey's a NATO country. And that makes Turkey a state sponsor of terror, along with Israel and the United States. And by the way, there's been another one of these accidental airdrops of supplies to ISIS by the United States. And golly, I don't know how we're making all these mistakes, you know, and we're doing it so much, people are getting it on camera. Our face is red. We're just so embarrassed. We keep dropping all these guns and bullets and bombs onto ISIS. And, you know, really, trust us, we hate ISIS just as much as you do. You know, we're not in the business of setting up fake enemies to trick you into war. I mean, we don't do that kind of thing in the United States of America. Meanwhile, up in Afghanistan, we're seeing a classic case of mission creep, where the U.S. Army is constantly having to reinvent why they're staying there. Because when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan all the way back in 2001, the goal was to remove the Taliban government. That was accomplished in just a couple of weeks. Then we've got to stay because we've got to hunt down Al-Qaeda, but they'd already gone to Pakistan. And so they keep changing the reasons because the real goal is to garrison Afghanistan, to control its oil and its opium. And they're running out of reasons why they should stay. And the American people are saying, look, enough is enough. Bring our kids home. Oh, no, we got to stay in Afghanistan. They're building a Death Star up in the mountains. We've got to hunt them down and find that. Now, Obama is out there calling for the release of these U.S. citizens detained in Iran. And they're trying to make this a big stink. I think Iran would be smart to do it, but you need to remember these guys walked into Iran across the border and were arrested for espionage. It was a setup to create a provocation. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go right to the phones here. Glenn in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. About the computer problems, I found the solution.
Yes.
I wiped my hard drive and installed Microsoft Bob, and everything works flawlessly.
Well, I get a lot of people suggesting I use Linux, and I have used Linux before, and it's very useful and very stable. But unfortunately, a lot of my production software, I have to have Windows. And the other part of it is, and this is why I keep talking about the VIC-20. When all this stuff was getting started, you'd buy it, bring it home, turn it on, it would start, you'd plug it in, you immediately could start doing productive work. I remember the first time I set up a LAN in my home. Brought the router home, plugged it in, turned it on, everything worked. Today you go into these cable modems and these routers, and there's all these options and layers and security this and port forwarding that and IPv4 and IPv6. And what you're seeing is an accumulation of everybody's cost-cutting decisions over the last 20 years piled up into a big steaming pile of junk that nobody can figure out. Not even the people who make money selling it to us like Time Warner Oceanic. And there needs to be a drastic simplification, and everybody's out there saying, oh, well, you need to do this to deal with the computer security. And I have an idea about that. First of all, the biggest computer criminals in the world right now are the National Security Agency, so if we shut them down, and about half the problem's going to go away. And then you catch a real cyber criminal, and you crucify them live on national TV. Going to take them about a week to die if they're moderately healthy, and I think that'll probably tone down a lot of the other online mischief that we're seeing.
Yeah, there's a lot of this craziness. I'm still having trouble getting my cordless phone to sync up with my 300 baud acoustic modem, but it works at the time. I got an 8-bit ISA 1200 baud upgrade. So, we do have some cable choice here on the mainland. Usually you have a choice, like in this area, you have a choice between Comcast and Verizon Fios, and down in Texas they have AT&T versus Fios and all that sort of thing. So the mainland does have some choice, but I guess things are a little more proprietary out there.
Yeah, things are a little more constrained out here. I mean, you can get DSL on the phone line. It's very, very slow. They're trying to bring along a more broadband application, but it hasn't reached our neighborhood yet. But when it does, I'm certainly going to be looking at it. But again, it's not a question of this or that company is better or worse. It's a question that the entire infrastructure has been allowed to become needlessly bloated and decadent in the quest for getting it out the door and making your profits as quickly as possible, and not really, and we'll let the user figure it out. I mean, I've seen this trend in software development going back decades where, the owners of software companies like Microsoft, guarantee their own bonuses and stock benefits by letting the quality assurance inspectors go. And they just put out the products with thousands of known bugs, and they say, oh, the end users will figure it out and send us in what to do, and we'll let them work for us for free, and we'll get to keep all the money. And again, because computer software is indemnified from product liability, these companies don't have any reason to actually make sure their products are working before they go out the door. I mean, you ought to read that end-user license agreement sometime. It is hideously abusive. And all of this was put into law back in the days of the VIC-20, when home computers were a new fledgling industry, and they said it needs to be protected while it grows. And back then it made sense, but computers aren't a startup, fragile industry. They're major corporations of immense wealth and market dominance, and they don't need to be protected from civil liability for putting out bad products. I mean, we live in a society right now where if you own a business and you buy a truck for your company, and because of a design defect the truck crashes and you suffer financial harm, you can sue the manufacturer of the truck for the financial damages that you suffer. But if you buy a computerized bookkeeping system for your business, and because of a design flaw it crashes and you suffer financial harm, you are stuck. You are not allowed to sue the maker of the computer or the author of the software. It's in that end-user license agreement. They won't even guarantee that what you're buying is supposed to do what it's supposed to do. I've never been able to install my cut of 3D Studio Max on this Windows 7 machine. And nobody seems to know why. It's something to do with security somewhere. Windows 7 is so secure, even I can't use it.
Do you have the Windows Defender turned off? You can turn off.
I got, something. No, don't start down that, because I get that from everybody. Try this, try that, plug this. I don't want to do that.
Okay.
I bought this machine to work for me, not the other way around. And I think more and more computer users have to get away from this idea that they're supposed to be unpaid employees of the computer companies to find the problems for them. And I think more computer users need to stand up and say it's time to restore product liability to these systems, especially because so much of our society and economy is now dependent on them.
Yeah, I often think back to how great things were in the early to mid 90s when, you know, everything, the era of Windows 3, 3.11, Workgroups 3.11. Oh, it was so much fun back then, you know, and everything worked, and we had glorious regular VGA, but that was fine, you know. We had stereo sound, and it was just cool.
Well, you know, obviously I enjoy the high-end graphics cards for my animation work and everything, but I don't see why we couldn't get the advances of the technology without getting all the junk where everybody is out there trying to promote their particular codec because they want a licensing fee. And I worked for a company that was almost destroyed by the fact that they couldn't find any codecs that went from machine to machine to machine. And this company was spending huge amounts of time during data conversion on video and image files to go from one production system into the other. And it was just because some corporate clown was out there carving off their turf of the marketplace and saying, no, if you're going to use our hardware, you have to license our codec, and no, it doesn't plug into anything else, but you'll work that out for yourself down the road. And it really has made for an environment that is very expensive but very unproductive. And we can't afford that as a nation right now. We're not going to save this economy unless we bring back product liability across the board for everything made in this country. That's absolutely where we are.
If codec doesn't work, you could try Polaroid. But I take it you're familiar with the DOCSIS standards for the gateways and the routers?
I have no idea what you're talking about, and I shouldn't need to. Okay? I'm an end user.
Right. Well, what happened was they moved you from a DOCSIS 2 to a DOCSIS 3 router, and I don't know whether they downgraded your bandwidth personally, or maybe they're having a bandwidth problem.
I have no idea, but why should you and I waste our precious lifespan figuring out their problems? We're not on their payroll. We're supposed to be on our payroll. We bought these machines to do work that we can sell to make money to pay our bills, not just sit there wasting our time, energy, and everything trying to get stuff to work that should have worked when we bought it. And yes, I'm angry about it. Glenn, thank you for the phone call. We'll be back here with Wally after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to the show. And please forgive my rant, but, you know, after a while, it just becomes overwhelming. And my greatest fear is that the younger generation has sort of grown up believing this is the way the world has always been and is supposed to be, that when you go down to the store and you plunk down the plastic and you get a computer and a bunch of software, that you just accept you'll be spending weeks and months finding the problems in it all, reporting it loyally back to the manufacturers so that they can make version 2 a little bit better, except that they're not really making it better. They're looking for new things to sell, new whizzos, new gizmos, and it's become very junked up and bloated and very, very difficult to use and understand. And again, if I were going to make my living as a computer engineer, I would be making a point of learning all this stuff, but I'm not a computer engineer. Not anymore. I'm an end user. I want to plug it in, turn it on, and do productive work with which I can make money. And the state of current hardware is such, it is a major, major impediment to trying to get our economy restarted. All right, I'm going to put this all down. We're going to go over to the phone calls here. Wally in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, I disagree with your apology.
Okay.
These people that hire inferior people to waste your life because they don't know how to do their, let me say this word I think I can, damn job. You know, I have no tolerance for that. I mean, when they start screwing up and wasting my life, like you know what I'm talking about, I let them know I have a problem with that. I go from nice guy to AW in just a few seconds, you know, and I tell them, I said, look, I have a problem with that. You need to do your job, especially whenever they send me offshore, somebody like that, and you can't understand what they're saying.
It's not even that. When I'm talking to this lady over there in the Caribbean, I can hear her flipping the pages of the little cookbook they've given her saying, if the customer says this, tell them that. If that doesn't work, tell them to unplug the modem and plug it back in. That's always the first thing. And you know something? Every time I call Time Warner Oceanic, I've already gone through all the things. I've power cycled the digital box. I powered cycled the router. I powered cycled the modem. I still have a problem. I probably know more about this stuff than the person answering the phone, and still they insist on treating me like I'm an idiot. And that also annoys me.
That's a problem. And Glenn, you just talked to, now he's a different kind of guy. I'm not trying to put him down or anything. But like some of these people like to converse and solve the problem for the person that's supposed to be helping the individual on the other end solve the problem.
I understand that. Back in the 1970s and 1980s when I was, getting into this stuff, I loved working at the board level. I mean, I built my first computer out of telephone relays in high school, and then I got the VIC-20. And back then, I loved knowing the inner workings. But as I get older, there's a part of me that says I shouldn't have to worry about that any longer. I am trying to run a political blog. I'm trying to do a talk radio show. I'm trying to do computer animation. And, I have seen companies just collapse and go out of business because they'll invest in software that they cannot get to work. We almost lost the Final Fantasy project because of the problems with the first cut of Maya. And that I will acknowledge is stable after all these years. It's finally together. It's still got a few issues. But it was so bad when we first got it. We slipped our release date by an entire year. And it's horrible. And if I had been dependent on this cut of 3D Studio Max, I would be out of business by now. Because I have never been able to get it to install. Nobody at Autodesk is able to figure out what's going on. Autodesk says it's Microsoft's problem. Microsoft says it's Autodesk's problem. And I don't know. Maybe I'd have to take a representative from each one of them and put them in a room with chainsaws to settle that. But for us end users...
I think you're super tolerant. I think you're a hell of a lot more tolerant than you let on. And I don't think you should apologize. I just don't put up with it.
I'm not apologizing to the computer companies. I'm apologizing to the listeners for wasting their time on what is a personal rant here. Anyway, Wally, you wanted to talk about something else, didn't you?
Well, yes, I do. But the thing is, I think that the listeners need to be cognizant and pass it on and get the point across that, look, do your job and don't waste my time.
I'm mad as heck, and I'm not going to take it any longer.
There you go.
We do. We need to be more demanding. We're getting cars with ignition switches that turn off, cars where the doors unlock at random. What's that new one? 600,000 cars being recalled because the computer software randomly shuts the engine off. Why did we ever get into a state of being willing to accept this absolute lack of quality in manufactured goods just because it's got a little more chrome? And it's absolute nonsense.
Yes, it is. So we're on the same page with this, and people need to not be so understanding of these people. Let me just ask you this. Now, out of 100%, the people that's out there that are a fraction of the talented part of that, and a fraction, then there's people that are the other part, which is non-talented, that just are winging it. Can you put a number on that? I've got a number myself, but I want to hear it.
No, I really don't. Part of the problem, of course, that I'm facing is I am an old guy, and I learned computer technology and programming in an older paradigm of linear code and von Neumann machines, and everything went object-oriented, which is a whole different way of thinking about software. And I will acknowledge I don't know enough about object programming to fit all these little layers together in the block, and I'm finding that most of the people who really do understand it are part of the brain drain. They're leaving the U.S. and heading for greener shores. And so, we saw the same thing in Rome. Rome, at the height of its power, invented all these great technologies, and then as Rome began to fall, they forgot how to be able to maintain the stuff They were dependent on it. It collapsed and it brought Rome down. And we're exactly in the same situation with our computer industry. Our whole country is dependent on these machines, and they are grinded into a halt because they've become so bloated and complex. No, you can't figure out what's going on in there. You know, and that's it. Anyway, we've talked about computers enough. We're coming to a commercial break. Did you want to talk about Putin or not?
Well, no, the thing is, if you take a look at getting Joel Scalzon on, maybe you want to do that. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'll try and get him on the show, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks an awful lot there. Okay, getting on over to Iran. As you know, Obama wants the return of these 4 Americans. They're trying to basically create a new POW, or a new prisoner crisis, hostage crisis. In fact, when Fox News was running this story this morning, they showed video from the 1979 hostage crisis to try and sell this idea that this is Iran with American hostages again. Completely different situation. These Americans were arrested for espionage for walking across the border into Iran without their permission. Of course, if they'd been in Mexico walking into Texas, they would have been greeted and given free horse rides and medicines and jobs and all the rest of that stuff. But Iran has a slightly different set of rules. And they're trying to make this an issue. I hope Iran is going to be smart and say, yeah, it's not worth keeping these guys here, and just send them home, and that'll defuse the situation. Unfortunately, both in the U.S. and Tehran, the hotheads seem to be calling the shots and setting the tone in policy, and that's a very, very dangerous sign. Meanwhile, the Iranian envoy is blasting the U.S. ambassador for comments made by the U.S. ambassador about how Iran is stirring up trouble in the Middle East when it's all these U.S. invasions and coups d'etats, which is clearly the reason for the instability. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting on back to the situation with the Iran deal, which, aside from Israel's using their whores in the U.S. Congress and the corporate media to try and kill the deal, is now meeting resistance on the side of Iran because of all those last-second conditions that were added to the deal, I think intentionally to kill it, that have nothing whatsoever to do with the development and testing and deployment of nuclear weapons, such as limits on non-nuclear missiles, open inspections of non-nuclear military sites. These were all put in there with the expectation that Iran was not going to accept them, and there are a lot of people in Iran who don't accept them. But Iran at this point is saying that the fact that the deal got made, even if it gets scuttled down the road, it is a political defeat for Israel. And Israel is feeling more and more isolated every single day. We were talking about this story the other day where Europe's just had it with Netanyahu. I think everybody is. We're tired of the government of Israel's constantly playing victim, constantly trying to get other people to fight wars for them. It's been over a half a century of this stuff, and it's really worn very thin. And, of course, when you don't agree with them, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater. You know, Israel's government never did anything wrong, you just hate the Jewish people. And we're sick and tired of that one. Plus the constant wag the Nazis. They're running out of real live Nazis to put on trial. Now they're going around digging up bodies and saying, see, this was a victim of the Nazi chemical experiments. Getting desperate out there. Now, there's a very interesting article over at Salon. I'm going to have to tip my hat to them over there. Netanyahu's self-serving scare tactics. And they're talking about the fact that he's out there screaming that not only is Iran going to destroy Israel if they get a bomb, but they're coming after the United States. As soon as they get that first bomb, they're going to launch the attack on the United States. And, of course, that's nonsense. Even if Iran had a nuclear weapon, what are they going to do with it? Put it on display in a museum, march it down the street in a parade and say, ooh, we're Butch, we're in the nuclear club, because that's all they can do with it. An attack against nuclear-armed Israel by Iran would be national suicide. Same with the United States of America. And the rulers of Iran, like the rulers of every other country on earth, have monstrous egos. And they go to bed at night dreaming of future students having to learn their name and birthday, of their faces on the postage and the currency, of statues erected to their honor in the parks, and the pigeons of the world celebrating thereby. They're not going to do something that erases their own nation from the face of the earth, because then they don't get their legacy and their fame. And it's common sense, and Salon recognizes it. And Salon raises a very good question here. If Netanyahu is so far removed from reality regarding the threat from Iran, how can we take his word about anything else? And that's a valid question. Is Hamas really a danger to Israel? I mean, they say they're certainly overstating the danger from Iran. Netanyahu overstated the threat from Iraq. Remember, he was out there at the forefront of those screaming that Iraq had nuclear weapons. Iraq was going to attack in 45 minutes. Kill them now before they can kill us. And, of course, that was all a lie. And the more hysterical Netanyahu gets in his fear-mongering about Iran, the more he's undermining his own credibility. Because he's out there saying, wolf, 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 or, nuclear duck, nuclear duck, nuclear duck. Fool me once, so forth and so on. And here's a good example of the excess hype regarding threats to Israel, because Israel has now declared that the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, is a strategic threat to Israel, equal to the Palestinian militant groups, such as Hamas, and the Iranian nuclear program. Now, to say that a peaceful, nonviolent protest movement is as great a threat as a nuclear Iran doesn't make any sense at all. It's a failed comparison. Unless you understand there is no Iranian nuclear program, and then, it's actually kind of legitimate. But that's what they're out there trying to do, that people not wanting to buy Israeli products represent an existential threat equivalent to nuclear weapons falling on Israel. And I've told Netanyahu a billion, trillion, zillion times, do not exaggerate. And he never listens to me. Human Rights Watch has issued a new report on the treatment of Palestinian children by the Israeli forces. And we're talking about children as young as 11 being arrested, coerced into confessions through physical means, denying them access to lawyers, not even informing the parents that they've been taken off the streets. And they're using tactics like choking and beating to get these 11-year-old kids to confess to building a Death Star in a garage over there in Gaza or something like that. So, anyway. All right, turning to the economy, the stock market had a sort of kind of down day. The Dow ended 181 down. It was below 200 earlier in the day. So, things are not looking optimistic. And following the wild night about the Greek Parliament betraying their own people and approving the bailout plan, which was basically everything that the Eurocrats wanted. Cyprus caved totally, 100% on this deal. And the Greek people are very unhappy about that. But, as we mentioned earlier, actually just yesterday, it's not a slam dunk, because the rest of the member nations of the European Union still have to vote on this. And a lot of them are indicating they're not going to approve it, because the deal cannot be made to work. The IMF has come out and said, this plan is pointless. It can't work. It looks and sounds good in the media that there's a deal, but the plan cannot work. Great Britain's already saying they will provide no money whatsoever for any future bailouts. And up in Germany, Merkel is dealing with a revolt within her own ranks, that Germany's sick and tired of sending their wealth down to Greece. Because all that wealth does is go into Greece, turn right around, come back out to the bankers. None of it is staying in Greece with which to build industry and jobs. And that's the main reason this plan cannot work. The only plan that could have worked, would have worked, is writing off a significant part of the debt, especially the debt created through fraud by Goldman Sachs and Papandreou. But the money junkies refuse to surrender a penny of debt. And they browbeat Cyprus into accepting a plan which even the IMF says cannot work. And people in Greece are already feeling it. So are tourists. The value-added tax is now 23%. That's huge. And the value-added tax gets applied more than once. It's not just point of sale. It's point of transition. So prices are skyrocketing for the people of Greece and for tourists at a time when the Greek banks are still putting strict limits on the money the Greek people can take out of their own accounts. Now, here's what's really getting funny. The president of the Greek Banks Association, Luka Katselli, made a public appeal to citizens to please bring their money back to the banks. The banks are absolutely trustworthy. You should keep your money in the bank. And, of course, the Greek people are laughing at him. Because if there's one thing this whole Eurozone disaster and the Federal Reserve teach us is that banks are not trustworthy. Wall Street's not trustworthy. The European Central Bank isn't trustworthy. They're in business to enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else. What is missing is a public currency handled as a public utility. And economists are saying it doesn't matter what happens. Greece is probably going to be forced out of the euro next year anyway. All they did was kick the can down the road. By the way, yesterday we talked about Warren Buffett buying a Greek island. Apparently it's a trend. Johnny Depp, Brad Pitt, and Angelina Jolie are buying their own Greek island. We'll be right back after the news. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, hour number 2. Continuing with the economy, Puerto Rico says services come before agency debt payment. In other words, Puerto Rico is taking the exact opposite approach to their debt problem that Greece did. Greece has been coerced into saying that all the money that comes in immediately goes out to the bankers, and if we don't have anything left over to take care of the people, well, the people are just going to have to deal without. Go back to sponge diving or something. Puerto Rico's gone the other way, saying we have to take care of our people first, and the creditors are going to have to wait. I wonder if we're going to invade the place now. BRICS Bank has opened for operations in Shanghai, China, so that is ramping up. And more we are seeing the world turning away from the dominance of the U.S. paper dollar, which has made, obviously, the Federal Reserve very, very, very nervous indeed. Now, the news here in the United States, economically, is not good. Right now, today, there is a greater percentage of American children living in poverty than even back during the recession of 2008, when the mortgage-backed security fraud collapsed. 22% of America's children were below the poverty line. 23%. Today was only 18% in 2008. And that tells us there really hasn't been an economic recovery, has there? It's just all an illusion by the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons and that humans are warming the earth. And they're still trying to do that one. Oh, man, are they ramping up the propaganda to try and undermine all those scientists saying, you know, the sun really does control Earth's climate and it is cooling. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's warm. It's roasting. It's all the fault of people. You have to give us your carbon taxes. More about that later on. Very interesting article over in deviantinvestor.com. Missing gold, unpayable debts, financial crisis, bailouts, bail-ins. There must be a better way. And they're absolutely right. And this article goes down all of these bailouts to corporations at taxpayer expense, General Motors, Wall Street, TARP, the hidden bailouts of quantitative easing, because when they're cranking out new money from those printing presses and those computers, it takes away the value of the money you already have. The Federal Reserve has added at least $4 trillion to their balance sheet, which you owe them and your grandchildren, because of quantitative easing. Maybe as high as $9 trillion. The Federal Reserve won't say. So the Cyprus banks began with the precedent of confiscating deposits, the haircut or the scalping or the castration, depending upon your point of view, and it's now a template for future bank failures in Europe, Canada, the U.S., and other countries. Last November, Congress changed the law to redefine a bank savings account holder as an unsecured investor in the bank, meaning you are expected to share in the bank's losses. And why anybody would have a savings account to this very day amazes me. And the article ends, there must be a better way. Yeah, there is. Get rid of the private central banks. Go back to a public currency managed as a public utility. Because all of these evils we are seeing are a direct result of the critical design flaw in the private central bank model, which is that it creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt in order to entrap and enslave all humanity. With this lie that these pieces of ink and paper or numbers in a computer represent something of value. It's history's biggest hoax. I mean, compared to this, the cover-up of Jesus' wife is just a little coffee club chit-chat. Now, they're on the warpath against Donald Trump. In fact, Fox News was running this bizarre poll saying 67% of Americans would never even consider voting for Donald Trump, apparently to offset the fact that he's leading in the GOP polls by double digits. This is the Ron Paul treatment. We recognize it. We saw it in 2008 and 2012. They want him out because he is refusing to follow the script and only talk about gay marriage and abortion and women's rights. The Des Moines Register has gone as far as to openly say that Trump should drop out of the 2016 race. They're trying to do the Obi-Wan Kenobi on him. You don't want to run in this election. This isn't the office you want to hold. Move along. And they must really be scared of Trump. He's leading in the GOP polls. He's the Republicans' best chance to win the White House, and still they want him out. That's how scared they are of him. Now, the apparatchiks are hoping John McCain's star power is going to prevail against Trump, and they're still out there saying, oh, how dare Trump say this about our glorious hero, John McCain. But the reality is John McCain's star is quite tarnished, because we here in the independent media are covering the story about McCain's true background, and we're not towing the line for the manufactured image. Donald Trump is right. Surrendering and allowing yourself to be captured does not make you a hero of a war. It makes you a victim, but it doesn't make you a hero. Now, POWs who were imprisoned with McCain are saying he was never tortured because McCain cooperated with the North Vietnamese. Their nickname for him was Songbird. And among other things, he made these propaganda videos on behalf of the communists in North Vietnam. Something that they sent Tokyo Rose to jail for after World War II. During his aviation career, McCain lost 5 U.S. aircraft. I think that makes him an enemy ace. Then there was that wet start disaster and subsequent cover-up on the USS Forrestal. Now, McCain was right at the heart of the denial of surviving POWs in Vietnam. Remember that big stink? There are still POWs there. Oh, no, they're not there. We've accounted for everybody. There's nobody left behind. Now, the backstory for that, and I have to tip my hat to Sylvester Stallone, because he managed to get this into the second Rambo movie. Most Americans don't know this. When the war in Vietnam ended, the U.S. was committed to paying war reparations to Vietnam to replace all the stuff they'd blown up. Well, the U.S. just decided, we're going to keep that money. That's a lot of money. We're going to keep that. And Hanoi said, well, we're going to hang on to the POWs until you give us the money you owe us. And the U.S. said, nah, keep the POWs. We're going to pretend they don't exist. And that's exactly what happened. And right in the middle of that denial of our captured American servicemen in Vietnam was John McCain. Then there was the Keating 5 scandal. They're trying to keep that one from resurfacing in the corporate media. And for me, the blow that demolishes the myth and legend of John McCain is this guy actually thought Sarah Palin would be a good vice president. And they're hoping McCain still has star power because he can go on out there. He can defeat Trump with his smile and his winning personality. Story coming out of NewTotalitarians.com. John McCain sang like a canary to the North Vietnamese, and apparently he did provide information that allowed the North Vietnamese to refine their radar systems in order to shoot down subsequent aircraft. He's not a hero. Another story along the same line. Hope 212 WordPress. Songbird McCain, the evidence in his own words, his fellow veterans, and his captors. Apparently one of the reasons they called off the bombing of North Vietnam was awareness that McCain had given information to the North Vietnamese that would have allowed them to start shooting down more American planes. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go right to the phones here. Mo in Florida, thank you very much for being patient. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael. You're worth waiting for.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, listen to one of Ron Paul's Liberty talks the other night, and he did mention, I know, what you said about Trump, and I agree with you a lot of what he said, but, and I don't think he's fronting for his son, but, I don't think Ron Paul, I think he's still the very most principled politician or ex-politician out there, but basically his point was, Hitler came along at a very tough time, but if we're going into some kind of economic collapse, which a lot of people believe, Hitler came along at that time, and he was a strong man. And that was Ron Paul's warning. Hey, beware. This guy's telling people what they want to hear, just like Germany, like Hitler was telling them that, hey, we're going to get even with these with this Versailles Agreement, and he's going to turn everything around, and he did. And I thought that was a very succinct warning by Ron Paul, and I've learned to listen to him. So I just thought I'll get your thoughts on that and hang up. Thanks.
Well, obviously Ron Paul was a straight talker. And there's no question about that, and that's why the political machines were just as desperate to get rid of him in 2008 and 2012 as they are to get rid of Donald Trump in 2016. Because all of these campaigns are run on a pre-planned script of fringe issues that are fanned up for the voters to argue over to keep them away from the real critical things going on with this country, the economy, the wars, and so forth. That's why they're out there, ban the Confederate flag, we've got to ban this, we've got to hide the statue of this general, these are the important things, and the economy's fine, the wars are fine, you should be worried about whether we should sandblast Stone Mountain or not. And Ron Paul wasn't going to go along with that. And neither is Donald Trump. And we have come to understand that pretty much everything we're told about the reasons for every war in history are an absolute made-up fable. That the villains weren't as villainous as we were told. The heroes weren't as heroic. And we just live in this endless age of lies. And I think most people like me are just sick and tired of it. And we're coming to this opinion. I will have a truthful government, or I will have no government at all. Because better no government than a government that lies to us. I think that's just common sense, is what's going on. All right, I'm getting a lot of stuff sent to me about McCain. And article over here in WorldNet Daily, McCain and the POW cover-up. And basically talking about how John McCain was at the center of this denial by the U.S. government that there were still POWs being kept in Vietnam. And the reason was the U.S. government just said, let's just keep the money that we promised to trade for these prisoners. They're not worth anything to us. We'll just keep the money and we'll tell everybody that we know that the POWs are all dead and they should go home and forget about it. That's literally the deal they made. They sold those American POWs in Vietnam for a fast buck. And yes, it was a lot of money, but that was basically the reason for the POW scandal. Hanoi was hanging on to them to exchange them for the reparations the U.S. had agreed to. And the U.S. broke its promise. Hanoi kept the POWs, and the U.S. said, no, they don't really exist. Just a wild-eyed, kooky conspiracy theory from all those tinfoil hat wackos out there on the Internet. All right, Trump is now polling at 24% among the GOP, and Scott Walker's in second place at 13%. Trump is almost 2-1 over his nearest competitor. And all the other Republican candidates, let's see, Jeb Bush is at 12. All the other candidates are in single digits, and more of them are piling in. It's a free-for-all. So where Fox News is getting the numbers that's saying 67% of Americans would never vote for Trump under any condition, I have a hard time with that one. I mean, what if Trump is running against Attila the Hun? You're saying that the American people would vote in Attila the Hun over Donald Trump? It doesn't really pass the smell test. Story coming out of YouTube, actually a YouTube video. It's a video of Donald Trump's speech in Phoenix, Arizona, where you just get to see him for yourself, and he brings down the house. Everybody loves him. Now, as you know, one of the issues that Donald Trump brought up, that the corporate media and the political machine are trying to make go away as quickly as possible, was the issue of illegal immigration bringing with it a crime wave. And on Sunday's Meet the Press on NBC, Chuck Todd made the declaration to the families of these crime victims saying, we couldn't find a single study that links violent crime and immigration. Okay? Apparently unaware or choosing to ignore the U.S. government's own report on criminal alien activity published by the Government Accountability Office in 2011. Now, Breitbart News contacted Mr. Todd at NBC and said, you know, you need to be aware of this, and all they got was a no comment, which means, yeah, they knew about it, but NBC's job isn't to bring you the facts and the truth. NBC's job is to sell you the latest car, the latest fashion, the latest gizmo, the latest policy, the latest agenda, the latest war, the latest candidate. That's what they get the big bucks to do. Now, Lindsey Graham, servant of Israel, who never met a country he didn't want to bomb, came out calling Donald Trump a jackass. Donald Trump, in retaliation, called Graham a lightweight, and then he made what I think is a mistake. He gave out Lindsey Graham's private cell phone number. And I think Donald is letting his ego get the better of him, because Donald is letting them bait Donald where the GOP wants him to go. They want him off immigration. They want him off taxes, off the war. They're turning it into a personality contest. And Donald is letting his ego get the best of him here. And if there's anybody from Trump's campaign listening to my show, you need to calm him down, get him some ice water, and say Trump's strength is staying on the issues the other candidates want to avoid. Don't get lured into a mudslinging contest, because Trump is outnumbered. And they're definitely coming after him on that one. Meanwhile, retired U.S. General Wesley Clark is out there suggesting that it's time to bring back the World War II-style internment camps for radicalized Americans. Just the way that we walled off those Japanese and those Nazi sympathizers during World War II. Just lock them all away. Ignoring the fact that the shooter in Chattanooga, along with all these other mass shooters, is now confirmed to have been on prescription antidepressants. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at an email from a listener and asking a pertinent question. Why is John McCain getting all this attention in the media right now? Is he running for president again? I don't think he is. But like I said, the political machine is hoping that they can use McCain's star power as a weapon against Trump. Except that, of course, the backlash from the independent media is to point out that John McCain is no star. He's just another politician. His career in the Navy was engineered by his father, Admiral John McCain, who was also the guy in charge of the cover-up when Israel attacked and tried to sink the USS Liberty. That was John McCain's dad behind all of that. So they come from a long history of serving Israel and engaging in massive cover-ups, such as the disaster on the USS Forrestal. John McCain's status as a hero is manufactured for him. It's no more real than Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons. Now, getting on over here to some other skullduggery, over at Truth and Shadows, they're talking about a new book that's come out from a gentleman who used to work as a visa officer in the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And he's gone public with the story that he was ordered by the Central Intelligence Agency to issue visas for people working undercover for the CIA to become trained in the U.S. terrorists. And he got very upset with that because he knew these were people who should not be allowed into the United States, and yet they were being brought into the U.S. to be trained as terrorists and sent back to destabilize other countries. Now, there's a story here over at hangthebankers.com, and apparently there's been another witness that has surfaced in this growing high-level pedophilia scandal in Great Britain. And this latest victim has come forward putting this kind of behavior right in Buckingham Palace and Balmoral Castle themselves. And I think it's important that we start looking at this for two reasons. One, anybody who engages in this kind of behavior is wide open to be blackmailed by foreign governments. So if we just out them, then the potential for blackmail is immediately gone. Second, I think it's time for the people of planet Earth to really understand the kind of human beings that seek these positions of power. Whether it's political power, royal power, religious power, economic power, whatever. It seems to attract a specific personality type involving sociopathic tendencies. And I still don't get this idea of forcing yourself on small children. And maybe, so this is just a theory, if you realize these are people to whom nobody ever says no. They've got whatever they want. Immense wealth, immense power, comfort, luxury. They've never been denied anything. I imagine they're probably very bored. There's no challenge to their life anymore. Maybe they're so jaded, they can't feel anything at all unless they're stepping as far outside socially accepted norms as they can, just for the thrill to feel that little trickle of adrenaline. Or maybe they figure it's a right of rulership. I really have no idea. I think it's very disgusting, but I think it's time that we sort of out all of these people, whether it's Buckingham Palace or the Franklin scandal here in the U.S. This seems to be a common aspect of the secret life of rulers. Now, a new video has surfaced showing the beginning of the riot in West Baltimore. Back, when all the riots from the police killing of the gentleman there, and it has since come out that the Baltimore chief of police ordered the officers to stand back and let the crowd cause property damage and loot stores in order to make them look bad in the media. This video confirms that, because in this footage, and it's on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, the crowd is breaking into the front of stores and stealing things, and the police are just staying back on the fringe of the action and doing absolutely nothing at all. So those people who were involved in the riot got suckered in to doing something that made them look bad and unsympathetic on the media. And that's something you should all keep in mind when there's somebody next to you, some smelly kid saying, "We got to go break things down. Because that's going to be the FBI informant. These losers who've got nothing whatsoever going on in their life, and they become undercover FBI informants, and they feel excited because they're working for the government, and they go home at night and abuse themselves to old James Bond movies and go, I'm a spy, I'm a spy, I'm a spy. Now, there's an interesting interview over at Russia Today talking about Canada's growing problem with police brutality and the growing awareness among the Canadian people, just as is here in the United States, that you can be shot by the police without any explanation, without having done anything to deserve it. And there's an important aspect about justice and law enforcement. In order for a justice system to work, punishment must seem to be applied to the guilty quickly, but only to the guilty. When punishment is being applied seemingly at random across a population, that's not law enforcement and justice, that's repression. And it's actually going to lead to more crime, because people are going to say, I might as well go on out and hold up a convenience store. The cops are going to shoot me one way or the other. Now, here's an interesting story. Now, this article up in Canada is talking about a specific case which appears to have triggered a hacking attack against the RCMP's website and possibly one other. There is this website called ashleymadison.com, and it is a hookup site for married people who want to catch a little on the side. It's also located up there in Canada. Somebody hacked into it and got the identities of 37 million users who are going out of their marriage and finding somebody to fool around with, which is common enough. The statistics are out there. But I can't imagine anybody stupid enough to put their name and address on a website for this kind of thing. It has to be wide open. Now, oddly enough, over at governmentslaves.info, they had this video that was put out by a feminist organization saying that husbands should never be upset if their wives want to have sex with other men, and if you're upset that she's having sex with other men, you're just being sexist. That's the new thing coming out of the feminist quarter. So it's getting a little silly out there. Absolutely. All right, new whistleblower has come forward to report that 34,000 combat veterans are still waiting for the start of VA benefits. Remember last week we were talking about how over 200,000 vets have died waiting for treatment for their combat injuries. The VA has a higher body count than ISIS and Al-Qaeda put together. We've lost more of our kids to the VA than to enemy action. That's the reality out there. It simply does not work. They've abandoned our soldiers just as much as they abandoned those POWs in Vietnam. They're not of use to us anymore. We can't do anything. We'll just abandon them and hope they go away. All right, we'll be right back after these words. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as we come up to the top of the hour, it's time to talk about human-caused global warming. And the carbon Nazis are still at it. They're still out there screaming, oh, 2014 was the hottest year on record. 2015 is going to be worse. 2016 will be even worse than that. We're all heading to heck, and it's all your fault. And have you noticed how they really cranked this up just in the last week following these other scientists who came out and said that, yes, the sun controls climate on Earth. Yes, we're seeing a lineup of the low point in all 4 of the solar cycles over the next 10 years. And we're going to see a major drop in the output of the sun, and there will be a new mini ice age. And, of course, everybody who sold their honor for global warming funding is out there trying to say, oh, no, we're right, they're wrong. We're right. You must believe as we tell you to believe. It's incredibly hot out there. And, they're trying to say that 2015 is on track to be the hottest year on record, which I guess is kind of sort of correct if you don't count 1936, the Roman and medieval warm periods, and of course ignore those record cold winters we've had for the last several years as you total up your numbers. And we know there's a lot of fraud going on, because where these carbon Nazis get their record high temperatures is they'll go out and find thermometers that are in hot locations. We have documented at my ClimateGate page where these official NOAA temperature sensing stations are located in the air conditioning outflow of buildings, which is very warm. Air conditioning doesn't cool anything. It pumps the heat from one place to another. And if you put your thermometer in the destination, you're going to get high numbers. We have a photograph of an official NOAA temperature sensing station located right next to a trash incinerator. And they love to quote the temperature numbers from weather stations at the airport because they're surrounded by aircraft belching out tons of burning kerosene, and they get the numbers they want. Now, back here in the real world, the politically incorrect world, Arctic ice has grown by a third since 2013. Remember, last year was the summer that Al Gore insisted the Arctic would be completely ice-free. No ice up there at all. The polar bears are going to drown. And apparently the polar bears are doing quite well up there. They're not endangered. They're prospering. There's a lot of ice for them to hunt on and hop around on. They've become so numerous in some parts of the north, they're back to being considered pest animals. And everybody is still out there trying to just push this nonsense. Al Sharpton is out there saying that climate change, global warming, is a civil rights issue because the black population suffers disproportionately when the world warms up. Which is weird because I thought in Africa, where they all came from, it's actually a lot warmer than it is here. But this is Al Sharpton saying that the blacks are suffering from global warming more than the white people, and therefore if you're not on board with Al Gore and carbon taxes, that you're just being a racist. Meanwhile, Martin O'Malley is out there saying that the rise of ISIS can be blamed on global warming. I mean, some of this stuff is just getting silly. I have an article, I'm going to go ahead and post it on the news break, where I've collected all these links about things that are caused by global warming, many of them self-contradictory. But that's the hot topic in the agenda. Oh, we're the corporate media. We've got to be out there with global warming. It's the cause of racism, or racism is the cause of global warming, or, ISIS is to blame for global warming, or global warming's to blame for ISIS, and the polar bears are drowning. And by the way, polar bears float. Just so that you know that the white fur of polar bears, the strands are actually hollow. They contain air, and it does two things. It provides a blanket of insulation to keep the bear warm, and it floats. Polar bears do not drown. They can actually float while sleeping. They have been tracked swimming for 60 miles. And Al Gore's out there with his cute little stuffed polar bear doll saying, oh, these poor polar bears, they're going to die if you don't give us carbon money. Really is rather absurd. Now then, over in the wonderful world of genetically modified crops, apparently a UK-based company conducted a field trial of a new genetically modified wheat. The company's called Rothamsted Research, and the trade name for this was Whiffy Wheat. It's brand new Whiffy Wheat. It's GMO engineered to be resistant to aphids. Actually, it turns out the aphids think it's just delicious. And they've had to basically scrap this $5 million field trial of this wheat that the aphids find irresistible. And, of course, the danger is that the pollen from this wheat has now contaminated other wheat crops around there, which the aphids are going to find equally attractive. It's amazing how reckless they are with this stuff. And it is a reminder that when you are in a laboratory condition where everything is controlled, you can make the organism behave the way your boss is telling you to make it behave. And then when you get out in the real world, things get radically different. That's what happened with the BT cotton over in India. Under laboratory-controlled conditions, it did very well. Then they got out in the real world and discovered that it was far less resistant to drought than the natural variety. And all those Indian farmers lost their farms, committed suicide. The Roundup Ready gene is now broken off and going into the pest plants. The insects are evolving an immunity to the Bt toxin. And these GM companies knew that none of the stuff they were doing was really going to last. They just wanted to get people on that GMO treadmill, because once you buy their seeds, you must go on buying their seeds. It's like the software industry. Every 5 years, we have a new upgraded version. Roundup 2 is on the way. And by the way, the new version of Roundup, along with glyphosate and all of its attendant health problems, they're using one of the ingredients from the Agent Orange defoliant of Vietnam vintage to make up for the fact that the glyphosate just doesn't work any longer. GMO technology is the most dangerous technology man has ever experimented with. It's more dangerous than nuclear power, because if you make a mistake and it breaks into the wild, it will be everywhere. I'm still concerned about the experimentation with the epicite gene that sterilizes humans and the sudden precipitous drop in birth rates in the United States, in particular among the Hispanic population. Now, apparently there has been, and I thought I had it on here. Yeah, here it is. Over in Natural News, they're reporting that researchers have actually begun experimentation of genetically modifying human embryos. Now, at this stage, the embryos are not considered viable. They're being destroyed, but it's only a matter of time before they start bringing them to term. The Roundup-ready baby. And one of the reasons, and when you talk about alien civilizations and why aren't they here, and of course my pet theory is we've got nothing that would interest them. But there may be another one, that every advanced technological civilization reaches a point where they start tinkering with their own code of life. They make an inevitable mistake and trigger an extinction-level event, and that's the reason that we don't see indications of intelligent civilization out there in the universe. They get so high, and then they self-destruct. It is incredibly dangerous. And looking at the way they sell software just full of known problems, they're doing exactly the same thing with this GMO technology, and that is incredibly dangerous and reckless. And their attitude is, if it causes harm, we'll just buy off the people who are harmed. As you know, last week the House voted out this bill that will not only ban GMO labeling in the United States, but will ban the banning of GMO crops. In other words, bypassing the will of the voters down here on Maui. The tyranny of corporate dictatorship. We got to take another break for the news, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and apparently I'm having server issues now with the current version of the What Really Happened website, so we'll obviously be looking at that as soon as the radio show is over. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is still sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials and keeping us out of trouble. All right, turning back to the news. The other day we were talking about the Stephen Hawking is the figurehead for a new major attempt to confirm the presence of alien civilizations. This is a $100 million project to build, or rather to use existing radio telescopes to listen for signals coming from other planets. And I certainly wish them luck. But you have to ask, would our current global leadership, be all that happy to find out? And I'm mentioning that because of what Dr. Gilbert Levin went through back in 1976 on Viking. And the historical precedent is definitely there. If you will remember, Marco Polo, when he came back from the Far East, the church grabbed him and threw him in a dungeon, because the church leaders figured their power would be threatened if the public found out there was this advanced civilization far off to the east that had never even heard of Jesus or the church. And at that point in time, the church had convinced everybody all over Europe that the world was entirely Christian, that the church encompassed the entire globe, and that nobody lived without benefit of religion. And the existence of China was a major threat to that. Now, eventually word of what Marco Polo had done leaked out. They were forced to release him and allow him to assume his rightful place in history. But we have seen this kind of behavior before. Now, I think with regard to what happened over on Viking, what happened was that there was a positive experiment from the labeled release experiment, a positive result rather, a negative result from the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, and NASA just said, well, we're going to go with the negative. We want to play it safe. Everybody was kind of already gun-shy between the noise from the White House over missing the July 4th landing date and all the harassment from the Bible bangers about how there can't be life on Mars because it's not in the Bible. And, I mean, some of our people were getting threats, you know, about that whole issue. So NASA caved, did politically correct, said no life on Mars. And since then, a lot of scientists in a lot of other countries have looked at that raw data from the labeled release experiment and said, yeah, they did find something. There's something biochemically active. This is exactly the result we should get if there were microorganisms in the soil. Since Viking, subsequent probes have confirmed there is a high level of a class of chemicals called perchlorates in the Martian soil. And that means the GCMS could never have worked, because in the process of heating the sample to drive off organic molecules, those organic molecules would have been immediately decomposed by the perchlorates. And the GCMS did report a high signature for chlorine, which NASA assumed was from the sterilizing solution. But we now know that the labeled release experiment gave a positive. The negative returned by the GCMS was false, bogus, no way the GCMS could have worked. And today, NASA is still hemming and hawing, maybe, could be, kind of, sort of, because, again, agendas about whether people are supposed to know this sort of thing or not. NASA doesn't want to go back and say, hey, we were wrong. I remember the huge fight they had over the water content in the lunar rocks, because when Apollo brought the rocks back, the initial results said, oh, there's actually water inside the moon rocks and everything. Well, we all know there can't be water on the moon. It's a hard vacuum and this, and it must be a laboratory contaminant. And the original NASA analysis was put out saying there's absolutely no water on the moon. Since then, it's come out, yeah, the fine structure of the lunar regolith through capillary action can hang on to water. So it gets kind of weird. So anyway, Stephen Hawking is getting ready to go on out there. Now, of course, my take on the situation is that we should not expect broadcasts from alien civilizations for very long periods of time. I mean, broadcasts here on planet Earth began just a little over 100 years ago. And they peaked with superpower stations, you know, clear channel stations, 50 kilowatt, in the last couple of decades of the last century. But since then, the total volume of radio broadcast energy from our planet has begun to decline, because more and more of our communications are over cable. And soon they're going to give up the metal cable. Everything's going to optical, which leaks no energy out there into the universe. And so this attempt to intercept radio signals from an alien civilization presumes that you are, just by luck, catching them in that very narrow band of time between when they discover radio transmission and decide that optical fiber is a lot more efficient. And that's a very narrow window. So I still think that it might be worthwhile listening for the harmonics from AC power generation on these planets, because all alien civilizations are going to discover electricity. They're all going to discover that alternating current is the most efficient way to transmit that energy over distances. They're going to discover that the range of frequencies at which AC is most efficient is very narrow. And whereas a deliberate radio signal beamed out into space is measured in the tens of thousands of watts, or possibly the megawatts, you've got terawatts of energy coursing through these wires all across the surface of a world. And while radiant energy is proportional to frequency, and low-frequency signals are not as efficient, there are the harmonics generated by power systems. Yes, it's a 60 hertz signal, but there's a lot of noise at 120 hertz, 240, 480, and so forth. And it might be worthwhile listening for that. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Will in Ohio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. I just got off work and wanted to call you, man. I'm sorry, I'm not on topic.
Okay.
How much credence are you giving to this, to Trump and coming along the theme, making waves?
Well, I like the fact that he's out there talking about all the things all the other politicians don't want to talk about. He's stirring up the pot. That's why everybody's scared of him, and I think that's a good thing right now. We've gone through too many elections where we sit back and we let television tell us what the issues are supposed to be for the election. Banning the Confederate flag, race relations, gay marriage, abortion, women's rights, all this other nonsensical stuff that distracts us from those aspects of the government that really affect all of our lives, such as the state of the economy and these ongoing wars. And Donald Trump is refusing to play that game. Ron Paul refused to play that game. That's why they gave him the heave-ho in 2008 and 2012. And clearly they are getting ready to do the same with Donald Trump.
Yeah, he's making waves for sure. Mm-hmm. There's just so many things going on. It's just everything's escalating so rapidly that I don't know, man. Yeah, have you heard how much credence do you give to Lindsey Williams and his reports?
Not too much here. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as it turns out, it wasn't my server that was the problem. For some reason on my machine, Firefox has simply stopped responding to any websites. I switched over to Chrome. Everything's working just fine. I tried Internet Explorer. Everything's fine. Firefox, for some reason, won't go anywhere. Just blank page. So, another fine product from the U.S. IT industry. I've been meaning to switch over to Chrome anyway. All right, now let's get on back to all of these shootings that the gun grabbers are wagging at us, and it's Islamic terror. No, it's the availability of guns. It's the Southern white racists, and on and on and on. And to nobody's surprise, it turned out that the shooter in Chattanooga had been on and off prescription antidepressants for quite a long time, been suffering from depression. And in this country, you cannot suffer from depression without being given prescription antidepressant medications, which have this long, well-documented track record of causing acts of violence, suicide, bizarre behavior. They've deployed these medications just as recklessly as they deployed GMO. And looking back, we have seen the incidence of violence, mass violence, suicide, even domestic abuse skyrocket at the same time these medications began to be mass marketed to the American people. And right now, 20% of Americans are on these things, including 20% of the police force. Actually, more than that. It was a study done down in Florida. The police take more of these medications than the general population. What have we seen appear in the police landscape since these medications started being mass marketed? Unrestricted police violence against citizens. It's not the guns. It's not Islam. It's not racism. It's the medications. That's what's going on here. Every one of these shootings, they're always trying to find a common factor. Well, they all had guns. They all went to the gun-free zones, proving that they work. They're all on or withdrawing from these medications. That's the common factor. But prescription antidepressants are a $30 billion a year business. And that kind of money buys a lot of advertising in the media, so the media is not going to upset that apple cart, and they write very generous campaign donations. So politicians won't do anything about it. Congress actually held hearings into the link between SSRIs and acts of violence, but did nothing about it because the big pharmaceutical lobbyists were up there on Capitol Hill saying, "Oh, yeah, you don't want to mess with this. You don't want to go there. We're only writing campaign checks to people who think the pill is good and the gun is bad." Turned out the shooter in South Carolina was on drugs with a long history of triggering violence. Now, out in California, they've already passed that law saying all children must have the 40 vaccines to go to school. Looking at a similar law in Florida, California is taking it one step further, saying we're going to mandate all adults get these vaccinations. Why? Didn't they get them as children? And what about those of us who've already had all the illnesses anyway? I don't need a measles vaccine. I've had the measles. I don't need a mumps vaccine. I've had the mumps. And people are very, very concerned. The pharmaceutical companies are out there screaming about, those anti-vaxxers. They're a bunch of wacko conspiracy, tinfoil hat-wearing kooks, and you don't want to listen to. Vaccines are perfectly safe. Meanwhile, the other day we were talking about how the British government has come to a $90 million settlement with the victims of the Pandemrix swine flu vaccine, which has caused permanent brain damage in about 800 kids as a result of this mandated government program. And I said, why are the taxpayers covering it? And much to my delight, it turns out GlaxoSmithKline is being forced to pick up most of the tab. It's going to cost them $63 million to pay for the damage their vaccine caused. Of course, that's small change compared to how much money they're making selling these. And that's the new business model. We're going to sell this to a couple of billion people, and we'll pay off the few thousand who get wrecked by it. Sometimes I feel like going in and talking to these executives at the pharmaceutical industries and say, I've got a syringe here of something that is going to absolutely mess up your child for life. Okay, how much will you charge me to let me stick this needle in your kid? Okay, $1, $2 million, what's the price here? Because that's what they do when they put out these products, is they say in their head, all right, it's worth it to us if this medication's going to wreck up 3,000 people and we can make $2.5 billion, we can afford to pay this much in settlements. That's how they think about these things. The Hippocratic principle of, first of all, do no harm just isn't a factor any longer. It's all profit and loss. As long as we're making more money than we're paying in settlements, that's a good product in their eyes. Now, there's another case having to do with a young girl named Jody. She was 1 year old, and her parents took her to the hospital and agreed to this mandated MMR shot. What the doctors did not tell the parents is they were using Jody as an experimental test subject for an 8-way vaccine mixture. It was not only MMR, there were 5 other vaccines, including the live oral polio vaccine. And the parents had explicitly said, nothing but MMR, and the doctors did it anyway. And Jody went into a high fever, stopped eating, suffered permanent brain damage, just wrecked. And the parents have been trying for years to get the hospital to acknowledge what they did, where it all came from. These people have had to deal with death threats. It's almost like organized crime is running American corporations now. You don't like our product, we do something bad to you. You don't complain, we come over to your house, we mess you up. Alrighty, we're going to grab a phone call here. Steve in California, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Well, you were talking about the vaccine thing. You know, anybody who claims that you're a conspiracy theorist and wears the tin hat, if the government insists that you, as an adult, take it, even though you've already had those childhood diseases, that should stand out in somebody's mind to say, that doesn't sound right. What's not right about that? I've already had the diseases, I can't get them again, and you insist to make it mandatory that I take these shots? That should be loud and clear that there is an agenda here. There's something much bigger.
Well, the agenda is to force more money out of the pockets of the people and into the pockets of the corporation. We're at the point right now where the entire economy is propped up by ordering us to buy things we don't want, cannot use, may even be dangerous. Thank you for the call, Steve. Got to let you go. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk about the story of a guy named Dr. Jack Wolfson. Now, this guy is out in Arizona, and he is a practicing physician who has been very vocal about the dangers of vaccines. And you shouldn't just be vaccinating everybody for everything just because it's a cost benefit, because certain people are susceptible to being damaged. Now, as a result of this, the local media smeared him. He was under endless attack. And no less than 38 complaints about professional misbehavior were filed against him at the Arizona Osteopathic Medical Board. 38, that's a lot. They were trying to get his medical license suspended. Now, to their credit, the Arizona Osteopathic Medical Board looked at all 38 of the complaints and said, there's nothing there. The only issue seems to be that he is not going along with the consensus of the medical establishment, but what he's saying is an acceptable expression of Dr. Wolfson's legitimate view on what's going on, covered by the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. He has an educated medical opinion that he has a right to, and so he's still in practice. But this is what the big pharmaceutical corporations do. They go on witch hunts against anybody who gets in the way of their profits. This is like the mafia's running all over the American corporations now. You know, we're supposed to just accept dangerous medications, poorly working computer systems, cars that quit, food that's dangerous and unhealthy, because the alternative is they come on over and they're going to mess you up at home. Now, the upside, of course, in the aftermath of all of this is Dr. Wolfson's practice has exploded in a good way, because patients now understand, here is one doctor they know is going to tell them what is the best course of treatment for them, rather than what's for sale this week from the big pharmaceutical companies. Because those big pharmaceutical companies, they reward the doctors who push their products. I found out after my hospital stay last year, the doctor who'd been treating me was getting tens of thousands of dollars worth of goodies from all these companies whose services and products he was pushing on me. I'm not entirely convinced I got the best quality care. I'm not entirely convinced I needed to be in the hospital as long as I was. Now, here's an interesting story coming out of IDCent WordPress. And it's talking about the polio vaccine, because the perceived success of the Salk vaccine is the foundation on which the modern vaccine mythos is based. And in the official numbers, in 1952, there were 52,000 reported cases of polio. And by 1955, the number went down to 28,000. By 1959, it had dropped to 8,000. But it turns out, looking back, there was a little bit of skullduggery going on all the way back then. First of all, in 1952, the number of cases of polio was already in decline. But how they got these numbers, they did the same thing they did with the unemployment numbers. The U.S. government redefined polio. They changed the list of symptoms to narrow the definition. So these other people who would have been counted as polio patients, they were declared something else. We're seeing that again today with this so-called non-polio illness that is sweeping the country. And remember, there's already been one horrible accident with the oral polio vaccine, reverting to full potency after being administered. So even back in 1952, the government was changing the definitions and creating numbers to help big pharmaceutical sell you products. We live in a world of lies. we live in a real-life matrix. It's time for that red pill. Absolutely essential that we break free. Now then, as you know, last week there was a video that surfaced that showed a top Planned Parenthood official talking about selling the pieces of aborted babies to companies involved in medical research, various other things like that, and admitting that they performed the abortions in a way to preserve the bodies for maximum commercial value, rather than doing what was best for the mother. Apparently, last week, the corporate media was out there trying to spin it, saying the video was out of context. The alleged video implied this. There was nothing alleged about it. The video was all over YouTube, and it didn't imply anything. You had this Planned Parenthood official saying, yeah, we're going to sell you pieces of babies for money. And they were trying to spin it. Then they got slammed because a second video came out. And the Democrats are shutting up about this now. This is a huge, ugly scandal, the dark side of abortion. And the new spin is, oh, these were sting operations. These people went in with the cameras to get these Planned Parenthood people to say what they said. Well, maybe, but these officials at Planned Parenthood were willing to talk about selling pieces of aborted babies. And it is a big stink for people who are not 100% comfortable with abortion, and I am one of them. This is just ghoulish. And it's another reminder that in the eyes of the government, we're just livestock. We're a herd of property to be carved up and sold however they need to. I think it's very ugly, and I can't imagine what sort of human being would be involved in this. I mean, it's one thing to go in and provide abortions to women who need it, but to be using them as factories for biological product, that is a little sick. That's a little upsetting. Now, we have another story coming out of RINF.com. The corporate media is finally starting to confront the fact that Western diets, such as here in the United States, are nutritionally deficient, contain ingredients that cause disease. It's taken them 10 years to catch up with the independent media, who were sounding off a decade ago about the growing use of non-nutritious fillers, chemicals, including chemicals that cause physical harm, chemicals designed to make you eat more, to increase the profitability of the food corporations. And now that a lot of people really are getting demonstrably ill from all of this, the corporate media is trying to act like they're the heroes riding to the rescue. Yes, there's a problem. We must be eating healthier. Well, we were saying that 10 years ago, and corporate media didn't want to be interested because they were getting big fat advertising checks from the large food corporations, who I'm sure are already getting out there to put up labels saying organic and natural and everything. Now that the U.S. government has said the use of such words is advertising lingo and they can't be held to it. Even the USDA certified organic symbol is not 100% organic, just mostly organic-ish. And a lot of products that are being labeled aren't what they say they are. And now, of course, we're getting a law banning GMO labeling and banning GMO bans. They don't want you to know what's going on for good reason. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And yesterday we were talking about this bridge out in California on the I-10 that collapsed. They actually, in one report, said it was excess rain caused by human-caused global warming. Gee, I thought California had this major drought going on. But there was so much rain, the bridge collapsed. And we were talking about the poor state of America's infrastructure and how many bridges in the United States are already rated as deficient, not really necessarily safe. Turns out this bridge got an A safety rating only last year, which begs the question, are the Wall Street ratings agencies now working for the Transportation Division. Oh, the bridge, perfectly good bridge. You can trust this bridge here. Put the retirees on it. It's amazing. Now, as part of the growing nanny state and in response to the California drought, the Department of Energy wants to impose new regulations on the dishwasher appliance industry. And they want strict limits on how much water the dishwasher can use per cycle, along with some other changes. And the limit being proposed is 3.1 gallons of water for a single load. Now, as it is today, dishwashers do not run the water continuously. They'll take in a volume of water, slosh it around, then they'll dump it. But they want to pull it down to 3.1 gallons of water. The appliance industry is out there saying this is another idea by the U.S. government that sounds good in the media, but it's not really very good because that amount of water is insufficient for a full load of dishes, which means one of two things is going to happen. People are going to be eating off of dishes that are really not clean and sterile and possibly get sick, or they're going to punch that start button twice in a row to get the same results. Remember when they were telling us that we had to put a bottle of water inside our toilet so we were using less water per flush? What happened? Everybody had to flush 2 and 3 times. Government comes up with these ideas because they sound good, not because they're necessarily going to work. Remember how well the breakup of Ma Bell went? Well, it sounded good in the press, that's why we went with it. Obamacare sounded good in the press. Look what a disaster that was. Now, here's a very interesting story. We've been talking about a lot of things going on over in Germany. This struck me as somewhat interesting. Apparently, back last year, 2014, more than 200,000 Germans formally left the Catholic Church. I guess there's a process you go through. You turn in your host or something, but it's not just not showing up. They formally left the Catholic Church, and it's expressing concern that the Catholic proportion of the country's population is in decline, which may or may not be good when you remember that the Catholics were very instrumental in bringing the Nazis to power and tried to establish what's called a concordat with Nazi Germany, which is a treaty with the Vatican that establishes Catholicism as the state religion. And the Catholics have done a lot of that. And, of course, the Catholic Church has been trying to downplay Pope Pius XII ever since, who was not only behind Hitler's rise to power, but Francisco Franco over in Spain. When Franco attained power in Spain, the first thing he did was fly the flag of the Vatican from the top of his palace to send the message. Thanks. And here's a new level of tackiness. This is coming out of governmentslaves.info. And this is about a church, the Greater Mount Moriah Primitive Baptist Church. And this is over in the Tampa area. And apparently, at this church, if you are not putting in enough in the collection plate, this church sends you a collection notice. Now, when I was a kid, and I was going to church, it was kind of a voluntary thing. The people who had more put in more. Us little kids, we'd have like maybe 15 cents. We'd be going to church. Mom would say, here, put this in the collection plate. That's what we put in. And now, apparently, the church is saying every one of you owes a minimum, and those of you not meeting the minimum, we're going to get a collection notice out to you. Delinquency notices. And apparently, if you're late tithing the church, they have late fees and other processing costs. It's not quite the image of religion that I was raised to look at. Here's a very bizarre story. This is back over in Germany. If you are a student of film, as I am, you will remember one of the earliest vampire movies, Nosferatu. It was silent film, black and white. And apparently, grave robbers have stolen the skull of the director of that movie. F.W. Murnau. And apparently there were signs of some kind of occult ritual found by the coffin, remains of candles and so forth. That's a little weird. I don't know, has Skull and Bones been seen in the area? They have a long history of digging up other people's heads and taking them away. They're still arguing over whether that is or is not the skull of Geronimo over there in the tombs. Okay, we already talked about this project, $100 million radio wave project to scan the regions for alien life. I'm sure they're out there. I mean, let's be very honest. I mean, it's impossible for there not to be life throughout the entire galaxy. And, okay, I'm still getting network issues. I don't know what I'm going to do with all this stuff. Anyway, Firefox locked up. My networking is locking up. I have no idea what's going on. I slowed it down. I want my old modem back. I want back the stuff that worked. And I apologize for the personal rant, but I don't think you listeners have any idea what I went through over the last 3 months trying to build a new What Really Happened website. All the constant problems, the connections, everything gone. Let's see, is that still working? Yeah, that's still working. It's just insane. How can we've got a government and a banking system whose attitude is, you owe us money, it's up to you to figure out how to make it, in their ultimate arrogance. And yet, many of them became rich by selling us tools that simply will not work. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of that old myth about how Pharaoh went down and told the slaves building the pyramids, you're not allowed to use straw anymore. Well, who does that hurt in the long run? It hurt the Pharaoh because his city built with mud without straw falls apart. And we're in kind of the same situation here. And one of the reasons I think this nation ultimately is doomed is because everybody is so politically correct. And everybody is so obligated to the people they owe favors to. Nobody will stand up and say, we need to start dealing with some real problems. Forget about the Confederate flag. Let's deal with our nation's computer infrastructure. Because it's falling apart. Let's deal with the bridges. Let's deal with the roads. Let's deal with the rails. Let's make this a nation that can make things again and stop riding the politically correct raft off the edge of the waterfalls. Because that's really the danger confronting the American people, is too much complacency, too many politicians saying, well, we can't talk about this problem because I get money from them. We can't talk about that issue because, I get donations from them. And we can't talk about that because my good friend over there is taking the opposite position. The deal-making has superseded common sense and productivity. Maybe that's another reason why people are looking at Trump. Because good, bad, indifferent, he does get deals done. He makes things happen. That's been the hallmark of his entire life, is making stuff happen. However he does it, he gets results. And that's something that's been missing from the American political discussion for a long time. We get hope. We get change. We can do it. And nothing gets done because the system is mired and gridlocked in political consideration. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back, I hope, tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, aloha, America.